Imagine for a second, right, that someone came up to you and offered to build you a perfect, like, one-to-one replica of your childhood.
Okay, wow. That is
Just a painstaking, obsessive recreation. Like, they have mapped out the exact scratches on the kitchen floorboards where you used to push your chair back every night.
right.
They've sourced the slightly peeling vintage wallpaper in the upstairs hallway. They've even calculated the precise angle of the afternoon light so it hits the living room window at exactly 4 o'clock. Like, exactly the way you remember it when you'd come home.
I mean, it sounds like a miraculous technical achievement, honestly, but it also sounds like a very expensive, very sterile museum exhibit, just, masquerading as a living space.
Yeah, exactly. That is the exact paradox here. It sounds incredible in theory, right? A total triumph of engineering and memory.
Yeah.
But then you actually walk inside this replica, and despite every single visual detail being mathematically, objectively perfect, the atmosphere just feels entirely wrong.
Oh, I can imagine. It's too perfect.
Right. The air is cold. The space is completely empty. You are walking through a physical simulation, basically.
Look at a ghost.
Yes. You suddenly realize that what actually made that house special, what gave it its unique magic and gravity, wasn't the specific floral pattern on the wallpaper or the architectural pitch of the staircase.
No, of course not.
It was the spontaneous, completely unscripted life that was happening inside.
Well, what you're experiencing there is it's an architectural uncanny valley. The shell is perfectly familiar, but the soul, the messy, organic human element that originally animated the space, is just noticeably absent.
And that eerie, haunted feeling, that profound sense of looking at a perfectly rendered billion-dollar ghost, is exactly the territory we are wading into today. Welcome to the...
Glad to be here.
We are dissecting the massive, highly polarizing, and frankly just chaotic internet reaction to the brand new Harry Potter HBO Reboot trailer.
The reaction has been, it's been a cultural earthquake. Truly.
It really has.
And it serves as this fascinating real-time case study in modern media consumption, fandom entitlement, and honestly, corporate risk management.
Totally. And to understand the mechanics of what is happening out there, we are pulling our insights from two deeply contrasting analytical frameworks today. We're looking at a pair of YouTube critiques that have just been dominating the algorithm.
Right, the two big ones.
Yeah. We have a channel called Terminally Online, which delivers a brutally aggressive, highly cynical breakdown. They explicitly categorize the trailer as hilariously bad.
Do not hold back at all.
Not even a little. And then on the other side of the discourse, we have a really detailed discussion from the channel Jesse Grant, which offers a much more cautiously optimistic structural analysis.
Yeah, they are really searching for the narrative justifications for this massive undertaking.
Exactly. So taking these two distinct viewpoints together gives us like a high-definition snapshot of a completely fractured internet.
It really does.
Yeah.
We're looking at the clash between utter cynical disillusionment and persistent, almost desperate fandom hope.
Okay, let's unpack, because we are not just talking about a simple television show. The stakes need to be laid out before we even get to the visual aesthetics.
Oh, absolutely. The aesthetics are just the surface.
Right. We are looking at astronomical, paradigm-shifting budgets that completely defy traditional television logic.
The numbers are wild.
We are looking at messy corporate takeovers happening behind the scenes that actually threaten the very existence of the project.
Yeah, the studio politics alone are a whole saga.
Seriously. We are analyzing a creative decision to replicate 20-year-old movie costs, almost stitch for stitch.
Which is a huge point of contention.
And perhaps most explosively, we're going to dive into a highly controversial casting choice that has ignited a massive firestorm regarding narrative adaptation and real-world allegory.
The structural integrity of one of the most lucrative intellectual properties of the last century is essentially being tested in real time right now.
Yeah. So whether you are a diehard fan who knows, the exact core of every single wand, or you're a casual viewer, or just someone fascinated by the sheer mechanics of pop culture mega projects, this deep dive will show you exactly how Hollywood's most audacious gamble in recent memory is playing out.
It's a massive gamble. And before we can even begin to look at the magical elements of the trailer itself, we have to look at the cold, hard mathematics that, willed this project into existence.
Right. The money.
The money. Because the immediate question echoing across the entire internet right now is simply, why?
Why remake it?
Exactly. Why remake a universally beloved, financially triumphant cinematic franchise so soon after it concluded? The answer requires us to follow the money, and the financial mechanisms at play here are just staggering.
The numbers are, frankly, incomprehensible. Looking at the sources, HBO is reportedly spending $100 million per episode.
Yeah. Just sit with that for a second.
Yeah.
$100 million for a single hour of television.
It's hard to even wrap your head around.
It requires a fundamental recalibration of how we even understand production budgets.
Let's contextualize that cost for you, the listener, to show the absolute insanity of this budget. Warner Brothers made all 8 of the original films, the entire cinematic saga, from Sorcerer's Stone to Deathly Hallows, for $1.2 billion total.
Right. For all 8 movies.
Yes, that is for 8 massive, groundbreaking feature films that literally redefined visual effects for it.
And if we extrapolate the planned trajectory for this new HBO series based on our sources, the math becomes even more daunting.
Okay, break it down for us.
So they are planning for 8 episodes a season, right, across 7 distinct seasons, essentially mapping to the 7 books.
Right.
If they maintain this $100 million per episode burn rate, we are looking at a potential $5.6 billion project.
$5.6 billion, that is, I don't even have a word for it.
It completely eclipses the cost of the entire original film franchise several times over just to retell the exact same story.
And to prove how unprecedented this is in the television landscape, consider Amazon's The Lord of the Rings show, The Rings of Power.
Oh, yeah, the previous record holder.
Right. That show was heavily scrutinized as the most expensive television show ever created. Everyone was losing their minds over the budget.
Do you remember the cost per episode for that one?
Yeah, that cost $58 million an episode. HBO is nearly doubling the cost of the most expensive show in history.
Which forces the obvious question, right? What exactly are they buying with that premium?
Seriously, are they buying real magic wands?
Well, they are attempting to buy guaranteed cultural relevance, but the financial bloat is really only one layer of this entire situation. The corporate reality surrounding this immense expenditure is incredibly precarious, right?
Yeah, the sources get into this, and it's wild. Warner Brothers, the studio backing this behemoth, is currently running heavily on debt.
Heavy debt. Their balance sheets are severely...
And amidst all of this financial anxiety, they are currently in the process of being taken over by Paramount. Wait, so let me get this straight. The studio that greenlit this historically expensive, multi-billion-dollar television show doesn't even securely own it anymore.
That is correct.
It's literally like buying a ridiculously expensive, sprawling mega mansion on a credit card that's already maxed out right before you hand the deed over to someone else who might have a completely different vision for the property.
That is a perfect analogy.
Yeah.
It is a massive financial liability inherited by new ownership. And there is a very real danger posed by this transition, as the Jesse Grant channel points out.
What kind of danger?
Well, first seasons of massive fantasy shows are notoriously tricky. I mean, they rarely find their perfect footing right out of the gate.
Oh, for sure. Think about Game of Thrones season or Parks and Rec, even though it takes...
Exact. The exposition is heavy, the world building is incredibly dense, and the audience is still adjusting to new interpretations of characters they already love.
Yeah.
So if season 1 isn't an absolute, undeniable, monumental hit,
like if it's just okay.
Right, if it merely receives okay reviews, what happens then? Will the new Paramount ownership look at the balance sheet, see a $100 million an episode liability that isn't generating a massive cultural return, and just immediately cancel the remaining 6 seasons to cut their loss?
Wow. Or, conversely, are they trapped by the sunk cost fallacy at that?
That's the other option.
Right. Are they so financially deep into this multi-billion-dollar hole that they have to keep digging, just throwing good money after bad, simply hoping they eventually strike gold in season 3 or 4?
It's terrifying from a business perspective. The runway for error here is basically non-existent. At that price point, you don't have the luxury of finding your footing. You have to be a cultural phenomenon from minute 1.
Which brings us to the core motivations driving this. If the financial risk is this astronomical and the corporate backing is this unstable, why execute this maneuver right now?
Well, our sources note there is a perceived lull in the franchise.
Right, the Fantastic Beasts movie.
Yeah. The spin-off movies suffered from diminishing returns at the box office. They really failed to sustain the cultural momentum of the original films.
And add to that the highly publicized controversies surrounding the original author, and the brand has objectively taken some serious hits.
It has. So if we connect this to the bigger picture, the corporate mandate right now is a safe, guaranteed return on investment to service that massive debt. That entirely explains the retreat to the bunker. So
the retreat to the bunker.
They know the first book worked. They know the first movie worked. They are retreating to the original, universally proven source material as the ultimate corporate safety.
So it is not a project born of a burning, irrepressible creative desire to reinterpret a text.
Not at all. It is a structural mechanism designed to act as a multi-billion-dollar band-aid for the studio's debt. By resetting the primary timeline, they could stay theoretically refresh all the massive merchandise lines, revitalize interest in the global theme parks, and re-engage consumers without actually having to invent anything new or take a single narrative risk.
They are monetizing nostalgia because it has a built-in, historically proven floor for revenue.
Exactly.
But that brings us to the actual execution of this thing. Because for $100 million an episode, what did that money actually put on the screen in this trailer?
That is the $1 million, or I guess the $100 million question.
Right. And according to the extremely vocal reactions we're analyzing from both channels, the answer is almost exactly what we already had.
Yeah.
And this really kicks off the aesthetic and tonal debate, wading right into the uncanny valley of Hogwarts.
The critique from Terminally Online characterizing the trailer as AI replication is particularly sharp, I think.
Oh, it's brutal.
The argument is that the footage looked quite literally like someone fed a detailed description of the original 2001 Chris Columbus movies into a generative AI video model and just hit enter.
I was so fascinated by this specific critique because it hits on a very modern anxiety about media,
Yeah, the fear of the algorithm.
Right. The critics even concede that the trailer looks fine, like the resolution is higher, the lighting is modernized, the visual effects are clearly cleaner, but they argue it feels utterly empty of any actual human creativity.
It's an imitation of art rather than new art.
Exactly. It completely lacks a unique directorial thumbprint, and there is highly specific visual evidence in the trailer to support this claim of creative stagnation.
There is. Look at the character of Hagrid.
Oh,
They cast Nick Frost, who is a genuinely talented comedic and dramatic actor. I mean, he's great.
love Nick Frost.
But then they seemingly put him in the exact same costume down to the specific cut of the moleskin coat, the materials, the overarching silhouette that was designed for the late Robbie Coltrane over 2 decades ago.
It's wild, and the internet immediately dubbing him Timur Hagrid.
Oh, that was rough.
It's so brutal. For anyone who doesn't know, referencing the online marketplace Temu, which is famous for selling cheap imitation knockoffs of established brands. It's hard, but it really speaks to that uncanny feeling. We are looking at a highly skilled actor essentially cosplaying a previous actor's performance.
Yeah, cosplaying is the perfect word for it. But the absolute bombshell here isn't just fan observation or, YouTube critic. It's the reaction from the original architect of the cinematic universe himself.
Yes, the fact that Chris Columbus, the director, who literally helmed the first 2 films and established the entire visual language of this universe on screen, publicly watched the first look and asked, word for word, what's the point?
It is a devastating piece of validation for the critics.
Like when the guy who designed the original mold looks at your $100 million an episode reboot and publicly questions why you are simply pouring new plaster into his old mold, you have a massive narrative problem on your hands.
You really do.
Yeah.
And this transitions perfectly into the core structural debate highlighted by the Jesse Grant channel. The absolute necessity of establishing a point of difference.
Right. What makes this new?
The concept of the point of difference is vital when analyzing remakes. If you're going to remake a piece of media that is still incredibly prevalent, I mean, these original movies are highly streamed, they're perpetually on television, they're just culturally ubiquitous, you must visually, tonally, and structurally justify your new version's existence in the very first frame.
You have to prove to the audience why this new iteration is unnecessary.
Exactly. And the general consensus across our sources is that this trailer failed completely to establish that difference.
Yeah, it wasn't noticeably darker in its cinematography.
No.
It wasn't more whimsical or surreal. It didn't utilize a radically different production design to signal a new interpretation of the text. It was hitting the exact same narrative and visual beats we've all had memorized.
The underlying hypothesis from the critics is that the creators are paralyzed by fear. They are absolutely terrified of the intense fan backlash that inevitably accompanies any deviation from beloved source material.
But that creates a paradox, doesn't it?
It does. The paradox of adaptation is that if a reboot is too afraid to differentiate itself from a highly successful original, it can never actually replace those originals in the cultural zeitgeist.
It's permanently stuck in second place.
Right. It will permanently relegate itself to being a supplementary B-grade version. Because it brings nothing new to the table emotionally or visually, it will always be compared to the original. And the original will always win because it has the advantage of nostalgia and primacy.
It's the ultimate catch-22 of modern Hollywood. If you change the sacred texts, the fans absolutely tear you apart online. Keep it exactly the same, everyone looks at the budget and asks what the point is.
You can't win.
But To look at the structural optimism out there, because it wasn't entirely a wall of cynicism, there were elements of the trailer that managed to cut through that uncanny valley.
Oh, absolutely. The most universally praised element, which demonstrates that the audience is still willing to engage with high-quality execution, was the music.
The music was incredible.
Bringing in Hans Zimmer to compose the score was a massive flex of that HBO budget, and it really paid dividends.
The musical theory behind the trailer score is fascinating. Observers from the Jesse Grant channel noted how it starts incredibly small and quiet, right? Utilizing very isolated instrumentation.
Yeah, just a few notes.
It perfectly captures the psychological state of a young, isolated kid locked in a cupboard under the stairs, entirely cut off from the world.
Right.
And then, as the visual scope widens in the trailer, the score slowly builds and swells to this grand, sweeping, overwhelmingly whimsical.
It musically maps out the narrative journey from isolation to discovering a massive magical universe.
Exactly. It was the one element that genuinely gave viewers chills because it felt like a fresh interpretation of the emotional state, not just a copy-paste of John Williams.
It acts as this auditory promise of the epic scale the series hopes to achieve. And the other significant victory highlighted in the sources was the casting of John Lithgow as Albus Dumbledore.
Oh, that seems to be the consensus best casting choice of the entire endeavor.
Absolutely. He has that rare ability to project immense, intimidating gravitas while simultaneously maintaining that inherent eccentric twinkle in his eye that the character of Dumbledore absolutely requires.
Yeah. Even amidst all the complaints online that the new trio of child actors look surprisingly young.
Which, I mean, of course they do.
Right. They are actual children. But even with all that, Lithgow served as a beacon of acting pedigree that really grounded the project for a lot of skeptics.
We can also see the marketing department attempting to leverage pure nostalgia in a highly calculated way, anchoring the new visuals with familiar audio cues.
Like the Ollivander.
Yes, the inclusion of the classic line from Ollivander the Wand Maker. We expect great things from Harry Potter. That is deliberate nostalgia bait.
Hook, line, and sinker.
It's an auditory anchor designed to ground a skeptical audience in a feeling of safety, essentially communicating to them, look, the faces have changed, but we are still honoring the core emotional memory you associate with this property.
Right. But there's a really compelling structural defense for this entire project that goes beyond just, hoping the music is good and John Lithgow nailed.
The structural argument is my favorite part of the Jesse Grant analysis.
Same. There's an argument that we are entirely focusing on the wrong metric by obsessing over the visual aesthetic. Like, maybe the visual replication isn't where the reboot proves its worth at all. The true point of difference is the structure of television itself.
Yes, this is the concept they call luxuriating in the lore.
I love that phrase, luxuriating in the lore.
It's perfectly descriptive because the cinematic medium, by its very nature, demands compression. The original films had to distill massive, sprawling, 500-page novels into aggressively paced 2-hour runtimes.
I had to cut so much.
That mechanical constraint requires cutting enormous amounts of character development, intricate side plots, academic world building, and honestly, just the day-to-day reality of existing in a magical school.
Right. A 10-hour serialized season dedicated to a single book completely alters the narrative pacing. It gives the story incredible breathing room.
Exactly. We can actually spend time sitting in the common rooms.
Yes. We can watch full sequences of them attending bizarre magical class. We can explore the daily, mundane life of Hogwarts that the movies had to absolutely sprint past just to reach the third act action climax.
The comparison the source makes to the adaptation of the sci-fi novel Project Hail Mary is highly instructive here.
Oh, break that down, because that was a great analogy.
So a feature film adaptation can brilliantly capture the kinetic essence, the major plot twists, and the central thrills of a novel. It is an adrenaline delivery system.
Right.
But a longer serialized television format allows the audience to actually live in the world alongside the character. The movie is a roller coaster ride. The television series is an extended residence.
That's a great way to put it. The movies serve as the highlight reel, and this new show is positioned as the unedited, immersive documentary footage. It's a very strong defense for the format change.
It is.
However, while we can debate the merits of pacing and runtime all day, we have to address the elephant in the room. The element of this production that has eclipsed all conversations about budget status.
Yeah, we have to talk about the casting backlash.
Right, because while John Lithgow was universally praised, another casting choice has caused an absolute structural breakdown in the fandom, dragging really heavy real-world complexities directly into the wizarding world.
We are shifting from debates about financial viability and visual effect into highly charged discussions concerning race, narrative allegory, and the mechanics of intense public backlash.
Now, I need to pause here for a second and make something incredibly clear to you. It's important to note, as we dig into the Snape casting backlash, our goal here isn't to take a side on the politics of Hollywood casting or to moralize the discourse.
Right, absolutely not.
We are not endorsing any specific viewpoint on race swap. We are here, purely, 100% impartial, to analyze the mechanics of why this specific choice is causing such a massive reaction online, and to unpack the literary arguments being presented in our two sources. We are examining the architecture of the content, not taking a stance.
Exactly. We are just looking at the data and the arguments presented.
Yeah.
And the reaction documented by these sources is exceptionally severe. The discourse has escalated far beyond typical internet grumbling or, aesthetic disagreement.
The reality on the ground is stark. The actor cast to play Severus Snape, a black actor, is reportedly receiving significant death threats.
It's awful.
The vitriol has reached a temperature where HBO has been forced to implement serious, heightened security measures on the physical set. The sources note they've had to release statements acknowledging that the filming environment can get scary external pressure.
It is a really dark reflection of the intense, often toxic sense of ownership that massive fandoms exert over intellectual property.
Yeah.
The language used in some of the more cynical critiques, like from Terminally Online, really highlights this sense of grievance. The project is dismissed as a bland nostalgia sloth fest, and there is a palpable anger at the perceived erasure of the original, highly iconic portrayal.
Right. The casting is framed by these critics not as a creative choice, but as a forceful ideological replacement of deceased actors like Alan Rickman. They derogatorily referred to the new casting as a black Snape dread.
The anger is rooted in a rigid adherence to the original text, combined with the broader rejection of modern adaptation trends. But when you break down the specific aesthetic grievances, the granular level of the complaints is just fascinating.
It really is. Fans are loudly protesting that this new iteration of Snape is seen wearing a jacket with a zipper.
A zipper.
A zipper.
I mean, the zipper complaint might seem trivial to an outsider, but it speaks to a deeper demand for world-building consistency from the fandom.
Explain that logic for us.
The argument is that a zipper is an inherently modern Muggle technology, and outfitting a traditional Jark wizard who famously despises the non-magical world in Muggle clothing violates the internal logic of the character.
Okay, I see the logic there, even if it is incredibly nitpicky. But the zipper debate pales in comparison to the discourse surrounding his hair.
Oh, the hair is the main event.
The trailer reveals the character sporting well-maintained dreadlocks, and this has absolutely enraged book purists.
Because in the novels, the text goes out of its way, chapter after chapter, to describe Snape as having lank, greasy hair.
Greasy hair. It's his defining trait.
It isn't just a throwaway detail. It is a defining physical manifestation of his character. It represents his poor hygiene, his neglected psychological state, and his overall unpleasant. It is a specific physical trait that actively disgusts the other characters in the book.
Right, so the critical argument from the sources is that giving the character well-maintained dreadlocks completely abandons a core element. It sanitizes him.
Exactly. It removes a vital layer of his inherent repulsiveness that was essential to how he was perceived, particularly in the early book, before his complex motivations are revealed.
The fandom had widely fan-cast actors who possessed that specific, melancholic, unkempt visual aesthetic. Adam Driver was the name thrown around constantly. And so this new direction feels to them like a fundamental departure from the source code.
But the analysis goes so much deeper than just complaining about hairstyles or a zipper. The most profound critique we're seeing from the Jesse Grant channel involves the concept of a narrative butterfly effect.
Here's where it gets really interesting.
This is the argument that changing a character's race in a highly established backstory isn't just a simple aesthetic swap that exists in a vacuum. It retroactively and fundamentally alters the emotional and moral core of the entire narrative.
Okay, to understand this literary argument, we have to examine the crucial backstory dynamics that drive the entire. In the lore, the central tragic conflict stems from the childhood interaction. Harry's father, James Potter.
Right, the Marauders era.
Exactly. James is depicted as a popular, wealthy, arrogant student who mercilessly and cruelly bullies the impoverished, socially awkward Snape.
Now, when both of these characters are depicted as white, as they were in the original text and film, the audience processes this interaction through the lens of standard, albeit severe, adolescent bullying.
It's a dynamic based purely on social hierarchy, popularity, and personality clash. It's the classic trope of the privileged jock tormenting the weird outcast.
However, the argument posits that if you cast a white actor as James Potter and a black actor as Severus Snape, you inadvertently but inevitably inject a massive real-world racial element into that specific bullying dynamic.
Wow. Yeah.
The torment is no longer simply about schoolyard social status. It immediately carries the heavy, unavoidable historical baggage of a privileged white character, physically and emotionally abusing a marginalized black character.
Consider the ripple effect of that shift. By introducing this racial dynamic, even accidentally, the series retroactively frames James Potter's actions through a lens of racial prejudice.
Which is a massive structural problem.
Huge. Because according to the established canon, James was an arrogant bully in his youth. Sure, but he was emphatically not prejudiced. In fact, his family's entire moral standing is based on their rejection of blood purity prejudice.
Furthermore, this altered dynamic fundamentally damages the characterization of Lily Potter, Harry's mother.
Oh, this is the part that really blew my mind when I was reading the source analysis. Lily is positioned as the emotional saint of the narrative, right?
She's the ultimate embodiment of pure, self-sacrificing love and empathy.
Right. In the backstory, she is childhood best friends with the outcasted Snape, but eventually distances herself from him and chooses to marry his tormentor, James.
Now, if James Potter's bullying of Snape now reads to a modern audience as racially motivated, Lily's choice to marry him becomes incredibly problematic.
Deeply problematic. Choosing to marry a man who racially targeted and abused your marginalized childhood best friend severely diminishes her standing as a purely loving, highly empathetic figure.
The argument from the source is that this single casting choice inadvertently triggers a domino effect that rewrites the moral standing of Harry's parents. It undermines the foundational tragedy that the entire seven-book narrative rests.
It is a rigorous analysis of how visual signifiers in adaptation carry profound. You cannot change a foundational variable without altering the resulting equation. However, this rigorous analysis opens the door to a fascinating counter-perspective.
Right. Raises an important question. What if we assume the showrunners are fully aware of this narrative butterfly? Did the creators execute this casting specifically on purpose?
Wait, you mean did they intentionally decide to inject real-world racial tension into a fantasy backstory?
Yes. The counter-argument from the Jesse Grant discussion challenges the assumption that this was just an accidental oversight. We must remember that the Harry Potter universe already deals incredibly heavily in allegorical racism.
Right, the mudblood slayer.
Exactly. The entire central conflict, the rise of Voldemort, is built explicitly around the concept of blood purity, the systemic prejudice and violence that pure-blood wizards inflict upon Muggleborn. The villains are essentially a magical supremacy hate.
So following that logic, casting a person of color as Severus Snape, a character who is profoundly outcasted, impoverished, and eventually manipulated, joining that supremacy cult out of a desperate long, might be a deliberate
Deliberate and meant to intentionally deepen and modernize those existing themes of systemic prejudice.
Exactly. What if making the bullying dynamic between the privileged James and the marginalized Snape more uncomfortable, more visceral, and more racially charged, the exact point of difference the new series is actually trying to.
There's a brilliant literary analogy being used in the sources to explain this concept, comparing it to modern adaptations of Emily Bronte's Wuthering Heights.
Oh, break that down for us.
So, in the original text of Wuthering Heights, the character of Heathcliff is described as dark-skinned. When modern stage or film adaptations cast a black actor as Heathcliff, it adds an immense, palpable layer of real-world racial tension and class struggle to his status as an abused outcast.
Right.
And it deeply contextualizes his subsequent brutal revenge against the privileged family that tormented him. The argument is that if you were to sanitize the role and cast a standard, handsome, universally privileged white actor in that role like Jacob Elordi, for example, you would actively erase a profound layer of thematic depth from the story.
The parallel is really compelling. It suggests the HBO series might be attempting a similar thematic by casting a black actor as Snape. They might be trying to visually manifest the internal and societal outcasting the character.
Exactly. It roots his complex psychological journey, his turn to the dark art, and his eventual fraught redemption in a framework of systemic prejudice, rather than just a personal grudge over unrequited teenage.
Under this framework, the casting is not an erasure of the book's intent, but a modern amplification of its core themes of marginalization.
It's a completely different way to look at it.
That is a remarkably deep, analytical way to view the situation. And it stands in stark contrast to the superficial arguments about, zippers on jackets.
It really does.
But unpacking these heavy thematic ambitions leads us directly into a massive existential dilemma regarding the target demographic.
The audience dilemma.
Right. If this $5.6 billion show risks severely alienating the die-hard book purists with complex thematic casting changes, but simultaneously relies entirely on visual nostalgia to justify its existence to the casual viewer, who is this actually for?
Who is watching this?
Yeah. Who is the intended audience that will actually generate a return on this multi-billion-dollar investment?
That is the ultimate corporate anxiety right now. The prevailing theory from our sources is that the studio is attempting to execute what they call the Star Wars, the Force Awakens strategy.
Okay. Okay, the mechanics of that strategy are fascinating when you apply it to a totally different franchise. Walk us.
So when Disney acquired Star Wars, they needed to guarantee a massive return on their investment. So The Force Awakens was engineered as a beat-for-beat structural remake of the original 1977.
It hit every familiar. A desert orphan, a droid carrying secret plans, a masked enforcer, a trench run against a planet-destroying superweapon. It was identical.
But the crucial mechanism of that strategy was wrapping that universally proven, highly familiar story structure in a sleek, modernized aesthetic that utilized cutting-edge visual effects, a faster cinematic pace, and most importantly, they introduced a brand new, diverse, younger cast of leads.
The calculated goal was to simultaneously trigger intense, comforting nostalgia in the legacy fans while successfully capturing a brand new, younger generation who hadn't formed an emotional attachment.
Exactly. And the studio is clearly attempting to run this exact playbook with Hogwarts.
But there is massive pushback from channels like Terminally Online on whether that playbook can actually work in the current media ecosystem.
Oh, yeah. The skeptics are asking a very blunt, necessary question.
But wait, are kids today actually clamoring for this? Is there a massive untapped youth market actively desperate for a modernized Harry Potter reboot?
The demographic data and cultural observation suggest a really pessimistic answer to that. Harry Potter is simply no longer the defining monocultural zeitgeist for today's youth that it was for millennials 2 decades ago.
The current generation already knows exactly what Harry Potter is. It isn't a new, mysterious phenomenon waiting to be discovered.
Right. The books are in every school library, the movies are constantly streaming, the theme parks are ubiquitous. The youth have largely looked at the property and decided they don't care about it with the same fervent, world-dominating intensity.
They are entirely captivated by different media ecos. The Terminally Online source, hilariously but accurately, points out that a 10-hour prestige television drama is competing for attention against an endless, algorithmically perfectly tuned stream of Italian brain rot on...
Italian brain rot.
Yeah.
That quote is amazing, but it's true. You cannot synthetically manufacture a generational phenomenon from the top down.
No, you can't.
If Gen Alpha is fundamentally wired to consume short-form, decentralized, creator-driven content, a massive, highly structured adaptation of a 25-year-old novel might fail to capture their collective imagination, regardless of how diverse the cast is or how pristine the visual effects.
So we arrive at the ultimate structural risk of this entire endeavor. The show is attempting to walk an impossibly thin tightrope over a $5 billion chasm.
It's terrible.
On one side, they are desperately trying to retain the legacy fans by promising an unprecedented level of book-accurate lore and utilizing familiar visual anchor. On the other side, they're trying to seduce a totally new, highly distracted younger generation with modernized casting, updated thematic allegories, and a cleaner, prestige TV.
The historic danger of attempting to appease 2 entirely different demographics with conflicting desires is that you often end up satisfying neither.
Yeah.
You risk alienating the legacy fans who feel the thematic changes betray the established spirit of the universe, while simultaneously failing to attract the new demographic who simply find the underlying material dated, slowly paced, or just culturally irrelevant to their specific anxiety.
It is the absolute definition of the risk of the middle ground.
Which naturally makes you wonder about the roads not taken, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. If Warner Brothers had billions of dollars in credit to spend, and they absolutely needed to utilize this IP to service their massive debt, was there a creatively superior way to do this?
There is a passionate argument from our source that if the goal is to expand the universe and keep the franchise alive for a new era, they should have abandoned the reboot entirely.
Right, just tell a completely new story within that world.
The most compelling alternative pitch is a gritty, mature, adult-oriented spin-off series focused entirely on a young Severus Snape.
Oh, man. That would be amazing.
A show detailing his initial tragic seduction into the Death Eaters, his psychological deterioration, and his incredibly dangerous, morally compromised life as a double agent working for Dumbledore during the height of the First Wizarding War.
A tense, psychological espionage thriller set in the wizarding world. That concept is incredible. It utilizes the safety of the IP. It naturally features the darker, more complex thematic elements that are perfectly suited for an HBO prestige audience.
And crucially, it wouldn't be directly competing with the beloved original movie.
Exact. It wouldn't be attempting to replace the cinematic childhood of a generation. It would be additive. It would expand the borders of the map rather than just repainting the center.
It is a profound what if. But instead, we are faced with the reality of the massive central reboot.
And this reality forces us to confront a foundational question about the modern entertainment industry, really.
Go for it.
Are remakes a valid way to keep a franchise alive, or is it purely a sloth fest that milks a legacy in oblivion?
Are exhaustive remakes a valid, artistically sound mechanism for keeping a franchise alive and relevant across generations? Or are they purely cynical, creatively bankrupt exercises that merely extract capital from a legacy until there is absolutely nothing left of cultural value?
That is the defining question of the modern franchise era. Let's synthesize the incredibly dense landscape we've just mapped out today.
Okay, lay out.
We've got a $5 billion corporate gamble running on heavy debt and facing the turbulence of new ownership. We are analyzing a visual presentation that hovers dangerously close to an uncanny valley, sterile recreation of a world the audience already knows.
We have the undeniable saving grace of Hans Zimmer's emotionally resonant musical architecture.
Yes, thank God for Hans Zimmer. And we have a highly volatile, deeply complex casting controversy that, depending entirely on your literary interpretation, either accidentally dismantles the emotional history of the main characters or intentionally and brilliantly deepens the allegorical themes of systemic prejudice.
It is an unprecedented amount of financial, cultural, and narrative pressure to place on the shoulders of a single television production. Only the passage of time and the eventual delivery of the first season will reveal if the creative promise of luxuriating in the expanded lore can generate enough momentum to overcome the crushing, ubiquitous weight of the original cinematic legacy.
Before we wrap up this deep dive, we want to leave you, the listener, with a brand new angle to ponder. Something that builds on the sources but wasn't explicitly mentioned yet.
The final thought.
Right. If Hollywood's ultimate goal is to keep these beloved properties alive forever, does perfectly remaking the exact same timeline actually achieve that, or does it fossilize the franchise?
Fossilize, that's a strong word.
Think about it. If we spend the next decade just retreading Harry's school, we prevent the wizarding world from actually growing. Are we preserving magic or just trapping it in amber?
It's the fundamental difference between nurturing a living, breathing ecosystem and maintaining a static museum display. It is a vital question for the future of all pop culture.
It brings us right back to that perfect, haunting replica of the childhood home we stepped into at the very beginning of our conversation.
The ghost house.
Yeah. The studio might have managed to perfectly recreate the exact pattern of the wallpaper. They might have spent an absolute fortune to build the structure, but as the audience, you have to look through those perfectly rendered windows and ask yourself, is anyone actually living inside?
Powerful thought.
Thank you so much for taking this deep dive with us today. It is a massively complex, deeply revealing topic about how we stories, and we really appreciate you letting us unpack the mechanics of it.
Yeah, it's been a great discussion.
We will catch you on the next.